This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Victimology is a science that dedicates itself to studying the connection between the victim and the offender. These two terms are intertwined, and in order to understand the concept, one must first obtain an understanding of these definitions. A victim is someone who has been assaulted or harmed by the offender. An offender is someone who has committed an act of violence or felony against the victim. The police use victimology in order to discover a correlation between the victims and the offenders in order to understand the underlying motives of every crime. Victimologists are an important part of the counseling effort to help the victims of crime and abuse regain a semblance of normal life after the deep psychological traumas inflicted by such events. This report aims to convince readers of the necessity of introducing a greater number of such specialists into the United States criminal justice system. The word victim comes from the Latin language. The word meant sacrifice dedicated to a god or a goddess. In the 19th century, however, the word obtained a different meaning, describing suffering and tragedy. Frederick Wortham first used the term victimology in 1949 in his book, which was dedicated to the study of murderers. Nowadays, the word victim is identified with someone who has suffered from harmful and illegal actions. Science itself is relatively modern. The concept has existed for a little less than 60 years. However, it is rapidly gaining acknowledgement in the justice systems around the world. Victimology is both different and similar to criminology, sociology, and psychology. It explains how, when, and where a person could become a victim. The reasons could be numerous, from murder to natural disasters. These studies are based on demographics, with factors like race, gender, and wealth being accounted for. The core difference lies in the ability of victimology to use all the sources and methods of information gathering that are included in criminological, psychological, and sociological studies, not restricting itself in any way. The crime's mental and behavioral aspects are accounted for in victimology. The rise of victimology as an independent discipline is in no small part due to many governmental and grassroots organizations that have dedicated themselves to assisting the victims of abuse, homicide, rape, and domestic violence. These organizations deal with these problems every day and have accumulated a great amount of information about victims and ways of helping them. Nowadays, numerous groups are willing and eager to help those in need. The four major organizations in the USA include the American Bar Association Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence, the Child Welfare League of America, the National Center on Domestic and Sexual Violence, the Battered Women's Justice Project. Even though there are many people out there willing to help the unfortunate victims of crime and abuse, the criminal justice system should not leave this matter to them alone. Instead, the police and the government should be more active in assisting them. Justice is pointless if the victim has not recovered from the assault. Another problem that the current criminal justice system faces in regard to helping out victims of domestic and child abuse is the problem of mandatory reporting by religious organizations. The confidentiality of pastoral communications is used as an excuse to keep many crimes from being disclosed to the police. While in some states, the pastors are obligated to report cases of domestic and child abuse should they receive knowledge of such, in many others, the archaic notion persists. As it currently stands, only 31 states out of 50 have laws that brand the representatives of religious organizations as mandatory reporters, with an exemption for certain religious conversations. The rest do not, meaning that even if a pastor or a clergyman possesses the knowledge of abuse, he or she has the right not to report it, thus concealing valuable information. The worst thing is that they could not be held accountable for this either. In order to make the United States a safer place for everybody, there must be no loopholes and ways around the obligation of every citizen to report a crime should they bear witness to it. all states need to adopt the mandatory reporting policy for religious organizations. The media could be a powerful ally in achieving this goal. In most states, nothing is being done about this issue due to the general unawareness and apathy of the populace. The mass media is capable of reaching out to many people within a short amount of time. They need to see the truth and be aware of the consequences of such inaction. If the subject becomes public and well known, the bureaucratic apparatuses would be left with no choice other than to do something about it. There are many terrible stories that the clergymen know about but refuse to report for one reason or another. Revealing these stories to the public would cause an outrage that would ultimately benefit justice. California is a state famous for many clergy-related scandals regarding child molestation and child abuse. In the year 1990, a law was passed that forced clergymen to report cases related to child sexual abuse. However, there was one important exemption: the pastors were allowed to remain silent about the crimes in case the information was obtained through penitential communication or, in other words, a confession. This loophole is now a cause of many court processes, such as the case of Rebecca Mayu, who was molested by a priest. She is currently running a lawsuit against her father, Jeff Bahai, for his failure to report the crime to the authorities. Right now, there are little to no alternatives to introducing a mandatory reporting law. In many cases, the clergymen are the only ones knowing about the abuse going on within their own ranks. The police and the supporting organizations usually do not know about the incidents until many years later. It is enough time to do irreversible physical and psychological damage. It appears that nowadays, the rights of criminals are studied and protected far better than those of their victims. What the criminal justice system must do is place a greater emphasis on the victims by promoting laws that ensure their safety and care, and by having enough specialists in the area of victimology to help consult the targets of violence and abuse. This report on victimology, definition, theory, and history was written and submitted by a student just like you. The Ivy Panda Samples database hosts thousands of works similar to this one, on various subjects. Visit ivypanda.com to find what you are looking for.